Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the USA Today Bestselling author of over a half dozen novels, including her newest, The Kidnapping of Alice Ingold. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Cate Holahan. Did I say?
Yes, you
I told
did.
you I was going to
Thank you
mess it
so
up.
much.
Okay. Thanks for making time. Congratulations on the new release. Although, I guess technically, this has not been released yet. Release date is what, November 1st. It's an Amazon first read, so people who have that ability have probably downloaded it already and started reading. And if you have not done that yet, make sure you download that before the end of the month. So I guess happy pre-pub day, but it's also pub day. I don't know. It's really weird.
I know it feels weird because you have this kind of like a soft launch and then you're launched. So it's
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
all the
when
things.
on November 1st, you'll see on your Amazon dashboard a huge spike in sales. So that's always fun. But I've found with these chats, I like to get back to kind of going way back in time. Obviously, now you've written, this is your seventh standalone novel, is that correct?
Yes, it is. And I
And
already
then you've done
filed
the
the eight.
collaborations with Kim and Vanessa. And then you've done some screenwriting. We definitely want to get into that. But before all of this came about, like, do you remember the very first thing you ever did that would be considered creative, whether it be like a poem, short story, whatever?
I remember my first rejection letter. I was 7 and I sent in a book to Scholastic and I had written it. I remember it involved like a monster under the bed. So it was my first psychological thriller. And because it wasn't a real monster. And I illustrated it myself, and I was so proud of it. My mother said, "Oh, we'll send it to Scholastic. Like maybe they'll publish something from it." And they didn't. They gave me a very nice rejection letter, and but said basically keep at it. And I did. I was a journalist to still make money, but then 20 some odd years later, I got my first publishing deal.
Do you still have that book or that story or
No,
whatever
that's
you
the
had
other thing I
done?
learned, a hard lesson. Do not send originals. So we sent,
Oh, wow. Oh,
and they sent it back with the
man.
rejection letter without the original and the original artwork. And
Do you
I
remember
think
how long it was?
I think it was about 10 pages.
Wow.
It was a kid's book.
Still.
But it had like a beginning and a middle and an end, and a twist where you weren't sure if the monster was real, and then um,
So like I'm assuming it was then handwritten, like you didn't have it typed or anything?
right. It was. It was.
Wow.
It was
And then
handwritten.
so what were you reading? I mean, like a lot of, like I talked to a lot of writers and, usually, yeah, it's in, maybe middle school or high school is when they really start getting into things. You were in elementary school. I mean, like at that time, what were you doing that made you want to to write this story?
Well, I think I always read. I just read whatever I could get my hands on, and that probably. I mean, at 7, I don't fully remember. I have vague memories of a. Oh, what was the story where the girl wants to be a newspaper reporter? I'm trying to think. Anyway,
I,
but
I have no idea.
it was like probably a lot of Judy Blume-esque type of stuff, which is,
Okay.
um, I think maybe why they always say if there's a book that you want to read that hasn't been written, you must write it. And I think because I
Right.
wasn't allowed to write read thrillers or anything, I wrote one. So, so there you go.
But were you, I mean, I guess the question is then if you were like reading like Judy Blume stuff, like what was the attraction then to at 7 years old to write, kind of like a thriller-esque type thing?
I think the same attraction for me now. I write from a place of anxiety. Like I think if
Mm,
something bothers me or concerns me or worries me, writing it and exploring it in that way is kind of my way of taking the teeth out,
okay.
And so I'm sure I was probably nervous about sleeping in my own room, which is when I got it. And I probably thought, well, I'll write this story about monsters under the bed. Um,
What do you remember the title?
I don't. I don't remember the title.
Oh,
I do remember that I won the elementary school writing award for it, which is probably why I thought it should be published. Like, I,
right.
I
So then
didn't quite
between
realize how hard it was.
yeah, so then between that and then when you got your first novel published, like had you done other stuff? Had you done like short stories or anything along those
Well, I mean,
lines?
I was a journalist for years. So I was writing, I actually got my first newspaper gig when I was in high school. And by the time I graduated, I was a front page journalist for the Record newspaper, which was at the time, New Jersey's second largest newspaper. It covered the whole top half of the state where I lived. And so basically every day after school, I started off writing obituaries. And then every day after school, I would go and work. I'd go to work. And,
Yeah.
they start you off. There was obituaries, and then they give you jobs as a stringer. And then after you go collect quotes for other people's stories, you start writing your own. And so that was really kind of, I guess, where I was writing. And then after, I guess in college and after college, while I was still writing as a journalist, I started writing fiction on the side. And all of that's kind of trunk junk, because one of the things I learned was it's kind of difficult to spend all that creative energy producing articles and interviews and then giving your best stuff to fiction. So it really wasn't until I took maternity leave with my first daughter that I really got to just go, okay, this is going to, I took maternity leave before I fully had her, so
Yeah.
this was like kind of when I gave it a good 3 months. And
So did you find that being a journalist, because I've heard from other writers that, sometimes yes, sometimes no, like, did you find that helpful because basically you're trained to write quickly and you're also trained to kind of write very tight? I mean, did that kind of help transitioning over into the fiction world or was it, or did you not find it helpful?
I mean, I think it helped in that you don't ever really allow yourself writer's block. You get up and write, and that's your job. And so I never experience. I always feel that if I don't know what I'm writing, first of all, I'm a big plotter, so I plot beforehand. But if I don't know what I'm writing, I figure it's because I haven't done enough research and I can't see it and I don't have the details in my head. And so sometimes that means I need to go on Zillow and find the house that I'm staging it in and then move my characters through that space. Or sometimes it means whatever it is. It could be the more research on the setting or the person's job. Or I need to start off with, I realize that, I'm not including enough sensory information. I need to go somewhere uh, to find the details that will kind of bring it alive. So so I think it's helpful with that. But I think that developing your own voice is something you can you really do more with fiction, because when you write for, whether it's a newspaper, at one point I was at Business Week and Business Week magazine, you're writing a little bit with the publication's voice, particularly now because you know, it used to be when, maybe they're changing it, but when I was a journalist, they wanted you to kind of like sound like the magazine, right? And that also because unless you were a columnist who had kind of earned your right to sound like they wanted it to be somewhat interchangeable. And
Right.
so it takes a bit to kind of, so you're not really developing your own voice as a journalist as much as you might like.
Yeah. And so from what I can tell, your very first novel was Dark Turns, correct?
Yes.
Now, is that your first just published novel or is that your first novel?
That was my first published novel. I mean, I had as I said, I had trunk junk,
I
things
was
that
sure
I
if the
had written.
Trunk Junk was more like short stories or anything like that. Okay, so those were
No, I
novels.
had
So
written
then,
full on novels.
oh wow, okay.
uh, but I think, and this is maybe where the anxiety thing comes from. I think that before I was writing, probably the first two things that I wrote that didn't make it. First of all, I wasn't writing in this genre. I was at the time, chick lit was
Mm,
big, Bridget Jones's Diary, and I think I was trying to kind of force my own experiences into that model, and it wasn't really me, and so I don't think that worked as well. So as I said, it took a couple kind of writing through to fully understand my voice and the kind of stories I wanted to tell,
right.
and then after I found it, I think that first book, as I said, I was pregnant, and my biggest fear at that point was, what happens if you bring somebody into the world who, uh, that maybe kids are kind of hardwired and they're not, they're not a boon to the world. They're not beneficial. That was my biggest fear, right? You're adding a person and you're going to do your best, but what if your best kind of just can't change hardwiring?
Yeah.
And my kids are fine. None of them are sociopaths. I guess that was just But that was kind of because I just felt that, this is a big responsibility. It's not just that you're raising a child, it's that you're bringing somebody into the world that the rest of the world is going to have to deal with. So, you know, you better hope that you're doing something positive here. And so anyway, so I wrote a story in which they're really horrible children in this story. And I think that helped me kind of purge that fear.
And so you mentioned that, I guess, plotting has that been the same for all of the books where you really have to, and I guess how much work goes into that typically? Like, do you really go beat by beat, kind of like a Jeffrey Deaver type thing where, it's like a 50, 100 page outline, or is it more just like, a couple pages and you go from there?
Well, I use Excel. My father tried to teach me Excel because he's an accountant and he thought maybe I would use it for business or taxes, and that never stuck. But I realized I could move the words around in those cells and and so use it to plot. And so really before I sit down and I really start writing from page one, I will open this document and I have everything from the plot and the character arcs and character details, like different pages with different things. And then right before I write, I even have it outlined chapter by chapter. So I know if I'm sitting down to write chapter two, I'm really trying to go from this point to this point, and this is where the character is going to, maybe they learn this, and this is how it's going to affect them emotionally, and it like has different cells that talk about different things that I need to hit, both from a character perspective and a plot perspective. And of course, then when you're actually writing, you know, little things make big changes over time. And so the characters won't be exactly who you imagined when you first sat down and plotted. And sometimes nearly every time I kind of reassess when I'm at the midpoint. And then I go back into that document and I replot and I tear it up a bit and then I replot out the end. And
Hmm.
and then I kind of go back and make adjustments. So there is a back and forth. I'm not kind of a slave to that document, but I do find it's helpful for me at least to sit down at the computer and know today is the day that this happens and the character, has this big emotional moment or whatever it is.
I think you're the only writer who uses Excel to do anything, which is impressive.
I
Usually
actually,
people use like
I'm turning other
Scrivener and
people onto
stuff,
it.
but
The Young Rich Widows crew now all uses Excel because I'm
oh
like,
wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, I was talking to Kimberly. Yeah, I think I chatted with Kimberly earlier this year, and she did not mention the Excel, but we will get into the whole, young rich widows thing, of course. Uh, so okay, so you Dark Turns comes out. You do several more novels. At what point do you get into? Because you had two, at least so far, two produced screenplays, which I know is probably a whole other conversation. Because I talked to someone recently, and basically talking about the difference between, writing books and writing for film and TV. And at least with books, like when a publisher buys a book, it's going to be published unless something crazy happens. But like studios and networks, like they buy concepts or they buy scripts or they option stuff. And, at least I don't know about you. For me, I just assume like when something like that happens, it's never actually gonna get made because it's always a miracle and all the stars have to align. So you have had though two, screenplays like actually go through the entire process and be made. So at what point did you start the, kind of dabbling, I guess, or really get into the whole screenwriting aspect?
well, so COVID happened and the bookstores were all shut. And I thought, what if they don't reopen and there goes my career? And, so I kind of had this crisis. And so I immediately, as my mom says, I kind of don't let grass grow under my feet. So I immediately applied for an MFA program at Tisch with the idea that I would learn screenwriting because I was thinking, well, it's kind of a pivot, and that way, New Jersey didn't have many bookstores as it was before COVID. And I just kind of felt like, well, there go the last indie bookstores in New Jersey. There'll be a Barnes and Noble maybe every 40 miles. And anyway, so that was my concern. And so I applied and I got in, and then I got my MFA during COVID. So the great thing about it was, it was virtual for that kind of first year, and then the second year I went in. Um, and I think, I, and also really those two movies that were made were my homework assignments. I got
Hmm.
so I had a, you have in screenwriting, you have to make some concepts and bring a screenplay to fruition, and you get a lot of critiques. That's mostly your MFA is people ripping apart your scenes, and you kind of learn, uh, which I think is great because it's what we don't get as authors until it's too late. Right. And then you get everybody sitting there giving you all their opinions. And, you know, sometimes you're just like, oh, you didn't get it. And sometimes you're like, oh, that's a point. Right. And so, because we really only, we have an editor, of course, and sometimes we have, a developmental editor and then the editors afterwards. But the MFA is probably the only time where there's like 25 people in a room and it's your go and everybody, you know, has an opinion and is telling you where they think it's weak. And so yeah, I was able to use those critiques and fine tune it. And then I sold it to Tubi, both of them. So I sold the first one to Tubi, and Tubi is probably the exception with how, maybe it's changing now, but how difficult it was, because like Hallmark, they would produce a movie of the week. So that's essentially the two I had produced. They were movies of the week. So, they do need to make like 40 of them in a year. So
Right.
they need the scripts and they need content. And so they took that one. And then after that, the following year, they reached out to me and said, we want, and at that point it was coming top down from a producer. They wanted something with strippers and the mob. And I was
Hmm.
like, all right, strippers and the mob, we're on it. I don't know why they came to me with strippers and the mob. I had never written a book about strippers and the mob, but like, I can research, I can do that. So,
So when you started the MFA program, how many novels had you published at that point?
so Her Three Lies was just coming out. So I guess my fifth was coming out, but my sixth was already in with the publisher. Because you know how
Okay.
we,
So did you find the transition? Because, some writers really are able to switch back and forth. They find, you know, it's just obviously a different kind of medium, but still it's the same type of storytelling. You're still looking at like the scene choice and, stage direction, dialogue, all that. I mean, I don't know, like, was it hard at first, I guess, going through that, coming more from the novelist prose standpoint, or was it just an easy transition?
well, it's funny. I think some of the hardest things for me were actually, sitting in a room and having, I think as an author, you kind of are used to a lot of control, right? And so especially, and you're also, you have the framework for your characters. Sometimes you're in their thoughts, you're writing in close, either, close third, or you're writing in first person, particularly in, the thriller genre. And so your character gets to kind of explain themselves sometimes through their thought process in a way that you don't get when you're writing a screenplay. So there were things sometimes where it would be clear to me why somebody is doing that, right? And it wasn't coming across on the page because, I fully can see the character in my head, but somebody, and also the great thing about it is that the MFA students, because they're reading a lot, are reading fast, but so are producers, right? So sometimes you have to be a little bit more transparent, I would argue, than you think. And also to have the confidence to just go, if an actor takes this line and delivers it in a slightly different way and it changes the motivation a little bit, like that's the medium, right? And I
Yeah.
can't, if you're going, you can't sit there and go, the character comes in looking upset or whatever it is, because actors hate it. and um and the thing is, you're supposed to, through the dialogue and through what happens in the actions, that is the only thing that reveals the inner turmoil of the character. It can't be, and the character can't like narrate their their feelings in the same way that they can in a book. So those are
So
kind of
what
the
was your
constraints.
level of yeah, so what was your level of involvement with the two films, Midnight Hustle and Deadly Estate? Like, was it just the screenwriter, you tuned it in and then basically one day you saw it on TV, or like were you on set, or were you in any type of, producer on it or anything like that?
That would have been so cool. So no, when I gave them in, it was COVID, so it was before the strike.
Okay, okay, right, right.
So they only had absolutely necessary people on set, and because uh, I had already, so when you sell it, and then you get, maybe two rewrites and a polish, or three rewrites and a polish, depending on and so I had already gone through that process with the first one. So as far as they were concerned, the script was locked.
Mm.
When they went there, everybody was just doing their thing, and they don't really need me. It would have been nice to get to, be a spectator, but
Yeah.
with COVID, they didn't let me do that. And then with the second one, um, actually, I was in the middle. I set that one, and I had done one rewrite, and I had two more in a polish. And the strike happened, and I certainly didn't want to kind of, be on the other side of that, even though I wasn't in the WGA. So I went pencil down, and, just lost out on those last rewrites, and they just went to, they went to set with it with draft two. I guess they
Mm.
just figured it was good enough. Um,
Hmm.
what can you do?
So how many scripts have you done so far?
So I did, those were the only two that have been made.
Right.
I did write a pilot and a show Bible for One Little Secret, which we pitched with Lionsgate and Three Arts to Stars. And that one, Stars did not take it. They already had the Huntington Wives at the time, and they were like, we already have one show with
That
women
May
behaving
Cobb, she's
badly.
such a troublemaker.
So no, she's great. I totally understand. But when they said that, they were like, unfortunately, we have something similar. And in Hollywood, similar, if you just write um, a thriller or a mystery with women, and they already have a and a mystery with women, like that is similar. So
Yeah.
that's the way they work. So anyway, so that didn't go, but it's still, I shouldn't say it didn't go there, but it's being shopped around by WME still. And
Okay, so you adapted the one. I mean, are you planning on adapting like your other books, or like as you write new books, do you also have that in mind now? More of like also the film TV aspect of, I want to work on a book, but I want to make sure it's also really viable for film TV and something that I could potentially adapt, or is that one of those things where you just are also okay keeping them separate?
well, it's interesting. I mean, that wasn't the kidnapping of Alice Ingold. I mean, I wanted it to be a little bit more high concept than my prior thrillers, just because of where the market's going. And I kind of felt like they're only, even with me, I'd written a lot of kind of the domestic suspense, and I kind of felt like uh, I'd explored intimate relationships a lot. And so this was still kind of in that genre, in that it's a mother-daughter story, but I wanted to kind of elevate it with, a kidnapping and kind of global business and politics. And so, I thought that maybe there could be some interest there, but it wasn't really a driving factor. The book that I have coming out started off as a screenplay, and the screenplay, you know, has some interest, but people really like it when it has some IP backing it up. And so I said, well, I bet I could, you know. So it's funny. I had written the screenplay, and I actually sold the book off of the screenplay. And then I said, well, I'll write the book.
Yeah.
So so we'll see if that screenplay goes. That's also being shopped, and the book doesn't come out until next year. And
And not to get, I guess, too
yeah.
nerdy or geeky about it, but I think it's better to have that existing IP for you as a book, because if you sell it just as a movie, then you basically get screwed. And like it's not even yours anymore.
Right. I mean, and that's still a struggle, I think, for authors, you know, across the board, is that once you kind of sell or you option those book to film rights, getting into the room and writing an episode or getting the opportunity to adapt is pretty difficult, because you're not a known quantity in the same way that somebody else, who they can look them up on IMDb and go, okay, they did this and it was this much money to produce and they made this much, and that feels safe in a way that um, you don't when you're an author, I think. So yeah, so I mean, I have a few of them that I adapted, and some of them have shopping agreements or options, and you hope that your script makes it all the way, but they kind of reserve the right to put another WGA writer on it, and so it could change. And that's also
Yeah.
just part of screenwriting, right? Is that uh once you take that option money, they it's the fine print often does not say that you are the sole writer or no one else can touch it, or it's often a, you know,
Yeah, I mean it's tough because again, there are a lot, I think a lot of, I guess chefs in the kitchen when you have like producers coming in with notes or if they bring in another writer and you just have to be willing to let that go. But I remember someone saying before that there are probably people who make really, really good money in Hollywood who have never had anything produced. Like you would not even know what they do, but they've worked on projects, they worked on shows, nothing gets made. Because it's always crazy just sometimes how much money gets thrown around. Like a Jordan Harper, he did the showrunner for LA Confidential and they shot a pilot and Walter Goggins was and God knows how many millions of dollars that cost CBS. And then
yeah.
ultimately they didn't pick it up. And it's crazy.
Yeah, but I think one of the wonderful things from coming from, being an author is that you've had your go at it, right? You've kind of said your whole thing in the book, hopefully. And that's been kind of the purest form of your creativity. And then this is a different medium and it's a much more collaborative medium. And so you contribute what people want you to contribute, right? And you just know that it's going to get it's going to get kind of taken, especially I think, in screenwriting, it's really a director's medium, right? And so you kind of have to know your place there. And I mean, I was just watched, oh, it's great, the that 5-part series on Scorsese. And he has scripts by like these major famous screenwriters, right? But he likes to have his characters ad lib. So imagine you're like, you've earned all your stripes and you're probably expecting every word. And then meanwhile, it's like, it's The Departed and he has um, Jack Nicholson ad libbing with Matt Damon and giving them motivations and then having them go, right? And listen, I love The Departed. I thought it's a great movie, but it has a lot of improv, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I just think maybe that's the thing is that I think that you can't be precious if you're going to try Hollywood. You just have, at one point with the Tubi movies, because they're pretty cheap to make in respect to, to Hollywood movies, they they told me I was allowed 5 locations, maybe 6 if one of the locations could double, right? So I mean, when you're writing a book, have as many locations as you want, right? Like as long as
Yeah.
you can describe it and put the reader there, I mean, you could write the equivalent of $100 million movie, like go ahead, write Megalopolis or whatever it is. Um, and then all of a sudden it's like you get 5 places.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, and you have to take into consideration stuff that you would never really like. You have to be like, well, if we're going to shoot on this street, we got to figure out, the time of day or like how many extras can be in the background or stuff that when you're writing it, you don't have to worry about any of that because you have an unlimited budget because it's in your head as
Exactly.
opposed to these other things too. Real quick, just my usual rant on The Departed. I think it's a great movie, but it gets ruined by the very end where we see the literal rat on, you know what I mean? It's like, do we really need that? Come on,
I,
Scorsese.
you know, I thought it was funny. It was kind of like a hat on a hat. I get it, but I
Yeah, it
thought
was it was like, okay, we get it. It's like, okay.
I just
Um,
thought it was kind of him winking at us at the end, being
but
like,
no, I mean it's very good. I actually have been meaning to watch the original what are they? I guess they were Japanese crime movies, the ones that was based on, because I hear that they're that like those movies are even better.
yeah.
But yeah, no, The Departed's great. I've not seen the Scorsese thing. That reminds me I should have definitely put that on the list. So well, let's get into the Young Rich Widows series. This came out a couple years ago, Audible original. You've done now what? There's 3 books have come out. I remember there's going to be more. When I was talking to Kimberly, she mentioned you guys have more, I guess, planned or at least contracted. Uh, can you talk about just like how this came about, how your collaboration came about with the series?
Yeah, well, we're really lucky in that Vanessa at the time, Vanessa Lilly, that's, she was talking to her agent, and her agent was saying, well, Audible is buying some short stories. And again, this is COVID. So we're all sitting there. None of us are on book tour. Most of us are used to at least being on some sort of book tour. Um, and So she, and so she was thinking, well, an Audible short story, I don't really know how to write a short story, but maybe I could get together with a bunch of other authors and each person could kind of take a character and we could craft like this round robin book. And also that way each character's, we're used to making characters with distinct voices, but boy, is it going to kind of be more distinct when you actually have a different writer doing it. So she reached out to us. We had known each other from conferences, and um, she had this great idea about that really comes from her husband being a lawyer. And she said, well, my husband said to me that he can't travel with the other law partners because if the plane went down, their shares of the law firm technically go to their spouses, but the spouses aren't lawyers, right?
Mm.
So like what happens to the law firm? And so that was kind of the genesis of that idea. And then we got together and we, made it crazier and zanier. And I just think it really worked. And it's funny because I mean, we all liked each other, but I think it's really the writing process that made us friends. And so we started with these characters who have every reason to hate each other. I mean, not a single one of them are friends. And so then we had to kind of build from enemies to friends, which is the arc of the story while they're, running from the mob and looking for stolen millions. And, we were going for a little campy because it's set in the 80s. So that allowed some zany fun that I think we don't have as much of in our solo books, which tend to be a little darker. This was kind of like a married to the mob meets the firm is kind of how we pitched it. So
Yeah, why the 80s again? What was the reason for that?
I think because the mob seems kind of silly if you're doing it
Okay.
now in
Yeah.
America, and we wanted that kind of madcap running from organized crime without getting into what organized crime does so much of now, which is sex trafficking and right, like some of these subjects that there's really it's not quite the same way that you can make light of it if it's a bunch of women running away from the mean scary mobster that seems a little caricaturist because we've all seen these 80s movies. So we kind of
Right.
wanted to have that lightness. And I think setting it back in the 80s, which um, I guess maybe every time feels a bit dark when you're in it, but then when you look back on it, you can kind of, you made it through. So it adds a lightness to it. And so that was the reason.
So I mean I could be wrong on this, but I think like all your novels are mostly set in present day, and I think like most of the rest of the co-writers are too. So you guys were, I mean, the 80s, it wasn't that long ago, but it was still several decades ago. Did you guys worry a lot about like the research aspect? I mean, how much research did you do to really try to make
No, we're
sure,
all
okay, we're in
old.
the 80s and we want to make sure like it seems as authentic as possible, or did you not really care that much about
I mean,
that?
we did some research, but like we lived it. I think that
Yeah.
we weren't the same age as our characters. We were young, but I think also things get stuck in your head in some ways when you're um, kind of going through formative years in the 80s. So I think a lot of us, well, a lot of us, I guess it's the first 10 years of our life that were the 80s or the first 15, depending. And so I think we kind of remembered the flavor that the 80s had. And also, like a lot of 10-year-olds, we remember watching all the movies about the teenagers and the adults at that time and the things that they were going through. So we had some of that core knowledge. And then, we researched the same way we would research anything, like what were the politics happening right here. And it's set in Rhode Island, which uh, as we were researching, there was this great series called, I think, Crime Town. And Rhode Island had a huge mob problem back in the 80s because it was so small that a little money and criminal activity could control a lot. It's not like, if you're going to try and control like the New York government, well, you need a whole lot of money. You need like conglomerate money. Whereas Rhode Island could kind of have organized crime have this outsized influence because it was so small. And
Right.
so that was interesting because I think obviously when we think of the mob, it's always New Jersey and New York and Chicago. And here's little Rhode Island, you know, with a mobbed up mayor in the 80s and completely kind of beholden to some of these groups.
And if I remember correctly, because I remember I think the deal had been announced. It was one of those. because like it was one of the more bigger Audible originals that they had at the time. It was initially going to be, I think, a two-book deal, right? Like so from the very start, you knew this was going to be a series, or at least you were going to do another book. Um, Again, trying to think about all the other books or the authors there that you collaborated with. Like, I don't think anyone has really ever done a series before. I mean, so this was like all of the four of you had just done standalones, but then coming in, collaborating for the first time, and then working on a series for the first time. I mean, that had to been kind of, I guess, a little wild, right?
Yeah, but it was great. I think we were lonely. Like, we
Hmm.
didn't ever book tours, we didn't ever panels with our other authors. So it was just us and our dark thoughts in a computer. And so I think it was so much fun. And I think that comes across in the books of plotting and kind of challenging each other to come up with things that are funnier or more meaningful or deep, pushing each other. And I think that we had a lot of fun, and I still have a ton of fun. I look forward to writing. I think it's probably the closest I've gotten to a writer's room, right?
Yeah.
Where you're bouncing ideas. And then it's not that you write collaboratively. We each kind of break. What we do is we plot the whole thing out, and then we take it 4 chapters a week because everybody writes their point of view character and it kind of goes round robin. And so the plot points that you're supposed to hit in your chapter and kind of the emotional things you want to hit for various characters. And so then you write your chapter, and we always give each other kind of right of first refusal with dialogue when it's the character that you write from the point of view perspective. So that way, um, if somebody says, oh, or if I say, I don't think Justine would say that, or I think she'd be more concerned about this at this point, we always take that under a lot of consideration and try and make it so the person who writes the point of view character feels that it's authentic and it matches what they're writing. But at this point we're on book 3, so we know these characters so well that I think a lot of times we can just naturally kind of slip into each other's characters, and it's good.
And so Lane is no longer writing the series, right? She's now, she had the favorites and blew up, I
Yes.
guess. I guess I don't know if that's the reason she stopped, but like, so is it now just the three of you, or for future books, or are you guys gonna, is there gonna be a new writer coming in for the rest of the
Well, so it's
books?
definitely the three of us for books 3 and 4.
Hmm.
So we already have book 3 out there, Wild Wicked Widows, and in the 4th book, Crystal's going to have her, uh, very messy Sicilian wedding, where there'll be, um, I think we're gonna build in a serial killer to it, and it'll just be, you know, death of the wedding. So we're looking forward to it, and then after that, it remains to be seen. I personally would love to do more books. We have to sell them, and you know, the series was optioned by Amazon Studios, so we'll see if that, and it has, I can't announce it, but it has like a great showrunner on it and some great people that are doing it, and we're really looking forward to, you know, hopefully it getting greenlit. So we'll see.
Yeah, very cool. Fingers crossed. All right, so let's get into the newest book, The Kidnapping of Alice Ingold. Again, this technically comes out November 1st, but it's kind of out there right now. What can you tell us about this book?
So this book, as well, first start with just kind of like the log line, right? Alice is a wealthy 19-year-old, the daughter of a socialite and a AI genius CEO, and she is kidnapped outside of her Berkeley apartment. And the kidnappers basically give her parents clues that lead them to different destinations where she may or may not be. And these clues are kind of in the form of cryptic riddles, and really what they're doing is they're taking her parents and all the media attention and all the, so America on this scavenger hunt for Alice. And, the question is why? And so, and is Alice going to survive it? And will they find her? And so that's really the book. And the ideas from it were kind of twofold. One was the Patty Hearst kidnapping. So I see a lot of similarities between 1974, when Patty Hearst was kidnapped, and today. And one of the main ones is that in 1974 there was kind of this transition from manufacturing to like the digital revolution, right? Computers were entering offices. In another 7 years, they would start entering everybody's house, right? With the IBM PCs, and so people were had a lot of anxiety about how this was going to change their lives and how it was going to change the employment landscape, particularly young people or younger people who had been, recently trained for jobs that may or may not exist in this new digital world. And that's very clear with some of the missives when, Patty Hearst, who had Stockholm syndrome, I believe, and uh, was kind of writing under Tanya, but she wrote to her father about the fear of kind of the capitalist society and business replacing all these people with technology, and that people were going to become redundant and unnecessary, and a certain portion of the population kind of wouldn't be able to be productive members of society. And so I feel that there's similar fears now with this change from kind of the digital revolution now to an age of maybe, super artificial intelligence, right? And super smart computers that don't need labor in the exact same way. And
Right.
so that was really interesting to me. And so I kind of did a lot of research and read a lot of books about Patty Hearst, and then I read a lot of books about AI, and it also dovetailed with my background as a technology reporter. I covered tech when I was at Business Week and MSN, and then at CNBC it was more business markets, but so much of that is tech driven. So I ended up, interviewing Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Bezos and all those guys before they were fully running the world, but when they were like on their way to.
Before they
And,
went completely
I gave me
crazy.
a sense of, I think, this attitude of founders in Silicon Valley, which kind of goes along with the Facebook motto of move fast and break things, and just, like, let's invent it, let's get it going, and then we'll worry about, any uh, negative consequences later as they emerge. And so I kind of wanted to bring all of that and all those anxieties and concerns I have into a story, while also, kind of just writing a mother-daughter story. I have two teenage daughters and wanted to kind of bring the emotions there of when people are getting older and you have to figure out as a parent, like, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? How much should you still be involved? How much do you have to let go? How much can you still control? And so all of that is kind of synthesized into this book.
Yeah. So speaking of Patty Hearst, part of the epigraph is something from Patricia Hearst communicated to her parents. I honestly don't really know much about the whole Patty Hearst. I'm like aware of kind of what it's about, but I don't. I mean, obviously, I didn't do as much. You said you did a lot of research on it. Um, so while she was taken, I guess she was like writing, like because the thing is again, I don't want to give too much away, but obviously, Alice gets kidnapped, and the book centers around the idea of, the kidnap. We have a point of view from her mom, and then we also have these journal entries or diary entries that Alice is doing, and I guess that's modeled after the idea that Patty Hearst was kind of doing the same thing.
Yes, so Patty Hearst, sometimes they were recordings, sometimes they were letters to her parents, but she was in communication. There was always there's always the question of how much was it being directed by her kidnappers, what she's writing, how much of it was her genuine feelings, and then later on, when how much of it was just the psychological abuse that she endured. And actually, I mean, my book does not do this, but in the real Patty Hearst, case, I mean, she was raped. She had horrible things happen. She was locked in a closet and so there was a lot of physical abuse and sexual abuse for Patty Hearst. To That is not my story, so that part,
Right.
I didn't touch, but yes, there were all these communiques with her parents, and then later on when she adopted the name Tanya and kind of had been um, either won over, or I would argue had Stockholm syndrome, and was um, convinced that these people who had abused her terribly were now her best friends, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So in the book, again, I don't want to give too much away, but again, we're kind of like it's around the abduction. So there's like, the day before, days before, and then days after. When you were putting this, I guess, in your Excel spreadsheet, like how long did it take to come up with the I don't want to call it the layout, but you know what I mean? Like like, like, okay, well, this scene is going to take place at this point in time, and then we're going to bounce back because you are bouncing back and forth in time in a way, because there's also the journal entries or the diary entries. I guess when you're plotting out a book, how much time does that typically take? I understand every book is different, but versus then once you kind of feel confident to really start sitting down and writing. Um,
This one was interesting
yeah.
that I think I plotted it out, and at first I kept trying to do it, where the diary entries were more real time, right?
Mm,
And it wasn't working. And I ended up kind of getting a third in and tossing it because I was just like, because it takes away if it's, if her diary entries are past tense, right? And she clearly wrote them and now it's sometime, not very far into the future, but like a few days, you still have the question of if she's alive, right?
right.
And I think that I wanted that question to be in the reader's mind because that helps with the sympathy for the mom who has to be searching for her daughter, not knowing whether she's going to find a body, right? And what's going to happen. So if you kind of take away that, you take away a bit of the stakes, right? Because then as the reader, you see the next chapter and she's writing, so you're like, not dead yet, right? And so I wanted the reader to kind of be able to put themselves in the parent's shoes of going through this search, not sure exactly what state Alice was in. Um,
Right.
and so once I kind of figured that out, then I was able to kind of plot it out within 3 weeks. But it did go through the whole plotting stage of like a month and then me writing and realizing, I had just was losing some of that urgency.
So I like to kind of agree with the whole Walter Mosley saying that writing is more than just sitting down and typing or using longhand. Like it's thinking about the story, it's thinking about the characters and everything else. So you can go a day or two without actually putting words on the page, but you're still quote unquote writing because you're working on stuff. But like for you, typically when you're working on a novel, do you try to write so many pages a day, so many words a day? Like, do you have a certain goal in mind that you try to hit every day? Typically, I
Yes,
guess.
I do. So I tend to write fast with the journalism background, and I do try to hit a minimum of 1,500 words a day once I've sat down to write. And that's because I've already kind of plotted, so I know like the game plan. And then I do that until I hit the midpoint. And then at the midpoint, I reread from the beginning and I reassess, is it going the way I thought so, am I forcing it? What's happening with the characters? And then will go back with Alice Ingold. I did that at the 1/3 mark because I kind of knew it wasn't working. So I was like, I'm not even
Right.
going to take it all the way to the half. I'm going to go back now. But I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, it's okay.
My phone. So, so yeah, but once I'm actually sitting down and writing, I do that. And then, as I said, I get to that kind of midpoint, or in this case, a third of the way, and I go back and then I kind of rework it maybe for another week or two. And then I get back and I write. Um, and I do tend when I'm in writing mode, I try to write like 12 hours a day. I really treat it like how journalism was, where I had a certain amount of copy and they expected I mean, when I was at Business Week, you would sometimes have to do 2 online articles at 700 words each, and then you were always working on your overarching magazine piece. So you get used to a certain amount of copy that you have to produce. And so I wouldn't be able to sustain that all year, but I can sustain it for like the 3 months that I know this is the hardcore writing. Um, and then and then you go to edit and you have kind of this break while your publisher reads it and your editor, right? And then it comes back and you're on deadline to get the edits in, and that always just depends how much of a heavy lift with how much people liked it, how much they think that you know you've written something um, that readers are going to gravitate to given the time. And there's always a little bit of fortune telling with it. Or, I was so scared when I wrote this book. I thought if AI cures cancer before this thing comes out, like, God help me. You know? I mean, I would like AI to cure cancer. I think that's one of its
Yeah.
really great use cases. But I was, I was sitting there like,
I think it's a little, yeah, we're a little ways off from that probably. But so did you, where was I going? Oh, have you found like since you started going back to the screenwriting, because ideally with screenwriting, it's because a lot of it's more, dialogue heavy. When you think about movies and TV shows, oftentimes it's just characters talking to each other. Have you found that your dialogue has gotten better since you were doing screenwriting? You know what I mean? As opposed to like the earlier books that you may have done?
I think so. I mean, well, I think that it's interesting because I think part of it is when you're nothing I think trains dialogue almost as much as as writing a book, because a lot of times you're in the character's head. So I mean, you're listening to their train of thought, you're listening to the way they see a room, like everything is seen through kind of through the character. So that's so many words and you have to make it interesting. Whereas the nice thing about a screenplay is, you're getting a snippet, so you can just give it your best one, right?
Yeah.
And um, I think that, so I don't know if it's the dialogue. I think one thing that screenwriting has helped me with more than anything is just clarifying that every scene you should have conflicting wants for your characters, right? That's really where drama comes from, whether it's drama, regardless of genre. And each character in their own personal way, given the traits you've given them in the background and the things that, right, has to be fighting for what they want out of an interaction. Otherwise, you get too expository, right? So I think that it just kind of reminds you, and because you don't have as much real estate in a screenplay, you have to be really vigilant about always having characters that have different things they want, and now they're they have to work for that, and whether they work for it in dialogue, whether they work for it physically, however it is, right? Whether they work for it by completely pretending they don't want what they want and they're lying the whole time, or they're playing it cool, but you always are very conscious of, this is a person that wants something by the end of this scene, and
Yeah.
in some ways there's going to be a winner and a loser at the end of the scene. Even better if who you thought was going to win is not going to win by the end of the scene, because that creates kind of like the dynamism for that thing. And I think for us in writing books, the scene is kind of the chapter, right? So you want that reversal of power in the chapter, or you want just so, because you don't want the chapter to just be they had to find a clue and now they have it, and so then here it goes to the next one. You want to be, and in addition to that, here's how the power dynamic changed, right? And here's how you can see this character who maybe has been docile for much of it is getting closer and closer to a breaking point where that is not who they're going to be going forward, right? And so I think you're always kind of maybe it's made me more conscious of that, I think.
Yeah. Um, the time remaining, I have a real quick question about just the title. Ingold, where'd that name come from? I don't think I had ever heard that before. Like, well, like, were there other names that you were playing with, or from the start where you're like Alice Ingold? That's what we're gonna go with.
I mean, the name is a little tongue in cheek because the story does delve into AI and her initials are AI. So there's a little bit of a wink in the cover about the content. But I think, I wanted a name that sounded really wealthy. And
Mhm.
I guess adding a precious metal into any name, and she's literally like, instead of like she's in the money, which would have been too cute, she's in gold.
I mean, is that a real name? I don't think I've ever heard of it
Um,
before.
it could be. I feel like
Yeah, it could be. It
seems
sounds,
like
yeah,
it's
it sounds believable.
right. I mean, I didn't want to call her like, I mean, Banks is a name, right? So I kind of feel like I wanted a name in that genre without, and I needed it to start with I. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
because was the one James Bond character, Moneypenny? Like that doesn't sound
Right.
real either, but that's yeah, that's a name. So, all right. So, okay, so the recent book who technically is out now, but it also officially comes out November 1st, The Kidnapping of Alice Ingold. Paperback, ebook, audiobook. Um, what have you read recently, watched, listened to? Anything you would recommend for people?
Yeah, well, I just got it today. I got Vanessa Lilly's new book. And so I'm super excited. Oh gosh, I left it downstairs. Darn it. Um, but yes, I totally recommend that one. And it's the follow-up to Blood Sisters. So, and then I'm looking forward to that. And then you know, what have I what have I read? It's funny. I just filed a book. And so when I'm in writing mode, I tend to not read as much because
Mhm.
I'm writing 12 hours a day. And also, more power to the people that can put it down and read other lovely characters and not get the voice muddled at all. But I feel like when I'm writing, I want to just be with those characters and those voices in my head. Because if you read a great piece of art, I think it's kind of hard not to start to want to have some of that and in the art
Yeah.
that you're creating. And I think it just makes it a little more pure for me if once I have my people, I stick with it. So I watch a lot of TV when I'm writing, but I don't read as much. And now I'm going back into reading mode.
Any good? I mean, you mentioned the Scorsese, I guess, documentary earlier. What about like TV? Any good TV shows worth mentioning?
Yeah. Oh, I just watched Task with Mark
Oh
Ruffalo.
yeah.
Task is great.
Yeah,
Oh, really
it made me
well
want to go back
written.
and rewatch Mayor of Easttown too, because Brad Ingsley
Right.
does like the whole world that he has there.
He's so amazing. You know what he does, I think, so well is it's like the plot might be the backbone that keeps it going, but they really are character driven dramas, you
Hmm.
know? Um, and I mean, he just makes you feel for people that would be easy to dismiss as like, well, that's the bad guy. And where they're just so human in that everybody is a person that makes good and bad decisions, right? And you're just watching these characters, but the outgrowth of these good and bad decisions they're making is things that are pretty exciting and lead to pretty dire consequences for people. And so yeah, but loved Task. And what are some other things? Uh the Huntington Wives is great. I think it's totally fun. It makes me a little nervous because I have teenagers. Anything with teenagers behaving badly, I'm like, oh, it's a little too my teenagers are actually really well behaved, but like I don't want to scandalize them, but it's a little too real to life, right?
Yeah.
How about yourself? Anything that you've
The season finale of Slow Horses was last night, so I really liked I really like Slow Horses. That's always fun. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, the new what was it? New Kristen Bell show with Adam Brody. What was it? They just did second season. What was it? Nobody asked
oh,
for this
nobody
or
wants this or
nobody.
something,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes. Yeah. And I binge that and yeah, I probably watch too much TV. My wife is sometimes like, do you want to watch this? And I'm like, I do, but I feel like I should be doing I should be doing work. I shouldn't be just watching TV but
I
there's a lot
tend
of
to
good TV
justify
out
it.
there.
Yeah, there's so many great. I mean, this really is kind of the renaissance of TV, and I hope it. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. It arguably was a few years ago. I think we're all nervous that things are changing because there's so much consolidation now. Whereas, I mean, the lovely thing when there were so many companies and tech was just throwing money at it, was you got a lot of different perspective. You could have a lot of different voices, right? Because they could have a show where they knew it was going to have a niche audience, and
Yeah.
because it was a land grab for audience, they were willing to do that. And then some of those shows, like one that comes to mind is like Reservation Dogs, which is obviously a play off of Reservoir Dogs, but that's
Yeah.
one of those because it has an all Native American cast and it's takes place on a reservation. I don't know if that show gets made now because they're immediately looking for more of a mass play. But it
Yeah.
was such a wonderfully written
Well, I think
show.
I mean, FX is a network that does take risks
More
with that
risk.
stuff. And what's funny is that then he goes from the acclaim of Reservation Dogs to then making The Lowdown, which is a great show. I remember talking to Lou Bernard not that long ago, who wrote on the show. But it's like, I don't know, someone had made a point like, typically he could have, used that to like, direct a new Marvel movie or something. It's like, no, he wants to do this show called, set in Tulsa. I think it's in Tulsa, but somewhere in Oklahoma. And yeah, it's neat when creators, I guess, can really be themselves and they don't feel pressured to, do the next big DC or Marvel or something like that.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I mean, I just hope that there's still enough kind of television real estate where we get shows that are, a little bit quirkier. I mean, I'm obsessed with Severance. I can't wait,
I
you
was going to
know.
say, I was actually going to mention Severance just because I remember seeing, I think, an interview with Ben Stiller where they talked about like nobody wanted that show. Like
Yes.
and it actually reminds me a lot of like publishing where, a lot of good, great books get rejected for whatever reason. And sometimes don't even get published. And some shows, like again, Severance, nobody wanted it. Apple took a chance and then it became what it became. And then sometimes those shows that like, all these networks or studios want just don't do well or like nobody watches them. So it's one of those things where it's like no one really knows anything. It's just I guess it's good just to create stuff and hope that people, that it finds an audience.
It's true. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's funny. We got the writer was their keynote speaker when I graduated when I graduated from Tisch. And he was saying how much it changed too. But I think
Mhm.
one of the issues was it's a comedy, but it's also a dystopia, but it's also um so it's like a dark office comedy dystopia thriller, right? And
Yeah.
that kind of and that's what makes it so wonderful, but that also is probably what makes a producer's head explode. And we can see some of that in being authors, in that people kind of want to know the genre. Like on Amazon, what category are you competing in to try and be number one? Where is it going to be shelved in the bookstore? Right. And then so I think there's always that tension between kind of the fast follow of, oh, this was hot, and can we have something that's just like the thing that was hot, but with a twist on whatever it was that was hot, versus, you know,
Yeah.
just letting
It's
human creativity go and seeing what
it's
they come
like I
up with.
think The Bear was nominated for like a best comedy, and it's like, yeah, I guess, but it's like you kind of view it more as like a drama. And I feel like just recently there was some network or some show that was just it was in Variety or Deadline or whatever, saying that it was going to be submitted under. I remember I forget what the show is, but I remember it being like, really, they're going to go under comedy instead of drama, just because there is that those shows that kind of have that mishmash of different things. Because yeah, I mean, yes, Severance, there are some very funny things in it, but I don't really think of it as a comedy. But at the same time, it's like, yes, you could definitely view it as a comedy. Well, anyway, I don't want to keep up any more of your time. If people want to stalk you online, where's the best way to do that?
So there's my website, kateholahan.com, and then I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I'm only on Twitter to reserve my name so nobody uses it.
Mhm.
I do not I I can't deal with the level of conflict and vitriol on that site. I'm out. But or I even called it by its old name, Twitter.
No,
That's
yeah,
how
no,
out I
yeah, no,
am.
that's how you should refer it to. Um, Actually, it's a little fun fact. My new Every Bishop book, The
Yeah.
Chateau, wrote, by the time it came out, it had, Twitter had changed its name, but there was a reference to Twitter in the book. And I remember having a conversation with my editor being like, what should we do here? Like, because like I do not want to call it X.
Right.
And so the reference essentially was like we kind of like did a little shiv to Elon where it was like, oh, and this was back, before they changed the name and the whole place went to hell or sort of like some type of comment like that. Because it was like we still address the fact that it's no longer Twitter, but I feel like normal
Without
people
having
still call it Twitter. But yeah, I I'm locked out. I mean, like I haven't used it in a long time, but one day I went in there just to see if I had any notifications or messages, and it was like I think now you have to have like two-step verification, and I never really set that up. So, or I have no idea. So yeah, hopefully it never gets taken over by a bot farm. That's my hope. But anyway, so Kate, thank you so much for making time. Everyone go check out the new book, The Kidnapping of Alice Ingold, which again, now I see the AI. I can't believe how I somehow missed that. I feel I feel so stupid. But yeah, that's clever. That's really good. So congratulations on the newest book. Everyone go check out Kate's books. Go watch her movies. I guess if they where are they streaming now? If they want
Well,
to
I
see those
think
movies.
still on Tubi, and I saw Deadly Estate on the Hallmark Channel
Oh,
recently. So I guess maybe they have some deal, or I don't know. Wherever
yeah.
movies of the week are streamed.
Perfect. So, all right. So again, thank you so much for making time, and we'll see everybody next time. Bye.